Hey, geography students. We are continuing our talk today on culture, and specifically today we're going to talk about popular versus folk culture. So, two very different types of culture, and we're going to take a look at the distribution geographically and also the characteristics of both of these two types of cultures. All right, so let's jump into it. All right, we're going to start with folk cultures. Folk cultures are what we consider traditional lifestyles, or the way things have been, and has not changed a lot over time. These are sometimes called the old-fashioned way. This is sometimes seen as backward to us that live in the mainstream culture, especially in the United States today, where we are a very connected society. And so some of these folk cultures seem very strange to us. Um, and one of the main aspects of folk cultures is that typically they are rural areas and sometimes very isolated from the rest of the world. And it seems like a lot of times that they do not have the same type of communication or transportation that the larger population shares. And for that reason, the cultural traits from the large or mainstream society do not necessarily make it their way into these folk cultures. And you've probably seen a lot of these different cultures, maybe either on TV or maybe you've seen them around. They typically are very close knit, and they oftentimes have a very strong family unit where these traditions are passed down from generation to generation. And you can see their traditional lifestyles that, maybe they have some rituals or traditions that go back hundreds, if not thousands of years in some cases. And it's oftentimes because that's the way things were done. And if things aren't, cultural traits that are not diffused from other parts of the world, then there's no new culture being made. And a lot of times they keep those same traditions in that sense. As you can see here, I have some examples that you may or may not be familiar with. The Amish in the United States is a good example. This is a group of people that are in pockets around, the United States, and of course, it's been popularized in TV shows now. But basically, they're known for living their simple, kind of old-fashioned lifestyle where they don't use electronics and don't use the modern, transportation systems. They're still in the old horse and buggy method, and this is partially religious to the fact that they believe that they stay closer with God in this traditional lifestyle. But you can see that they do not dress or use the same type of technology that we use. It's something that looks like if we went back into the 1800s, we would see a lot of people living the same exact way. And so it's almost like stepping back in time. Um, and this is true of many cultures. Basically, they kind of shrug off or don't accept the popular cultures, even if when they do come in, because they see it as an attack on their lifestyle. And this is the way they live, and this is the way that they are happy. And it harkens back to that old piece on cultural relativism that, if you remember back from the Nasarema article that I talked about, what seems strange to us is normal in other cultures, and we cannot necessarily judge other cultures based on our own standards of what is normal. Their normal and our normal are different, and there's no right or wrong way necessarily. It's just a different way of living your life in that sort of culture. All right, some other examples of culture. As you can see here, this is in Tibet. This is an isolated area of China near the Himalayan mountains, and you can see they dress very differently than the average Chinese person would. And it is because they are so geographically isolated. A lot of the times, the folk cultures that we see are very geographically isolated from the rest of their country or the rest of society because of things such as mountains, or you can see this in Amazonian tribes, right, where it's very tough to get to these areas, and they've lived there for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And what happens is mainstream society doesn't get to them, right? They don't have the communication or transportation that gets there, and so those popular culture things that we think of don't make it to these societies, and they keep living that traditional lifestyle. In that same way, we have others such as Native American cultures. If you go to the reservations, while they could, of course, have the same and use the same transportation and communication skills, a lot of them really enjoy, those traditions that their ancestors have passed down to them, and try to keep that traditional lifestyle. Sometimes it's the dances, the music, the traditional clothing styles, and ways of life that they harken back to, and they enjoy these types of cultures as well. And we see different aspects of our folk cultures in small pockets of what we do in our personal day-to-day lives. However, most of our lives here at Blythewood High School, I would say, is most shaped by a different type of culture. So before we get into popular culture, I want to take a minute and see if you recognize a couple of these images. All right. So if you recognize a couple of those images, you probably are part of popular culture, or you've been affected by popular culture. So popular culture is just what it sounds like. It's very popular, it's mainstream, it's widely diffused, it's geographically diverse and widespread, and this affects masses of people. So the large amount or the large portion of society makes up popular culture. And most of our society, especially in America, is conformed to popular culture. We use things such as smartphones and apps on those smartphones, like you see here, to communicate and transmit ideas and parts of our culture almost instantly today. And it allows our popular culture to grow and change every single day. Uh, Popular culture is different than folk culture in that it is very quickly changing, and it's because of this globalization effect. We have an accelerated amount of diffusion, in that cultural diffusion that we've talked about, because of technology. So we can communicate our ideas around the world in the matter of seconds now, whereas before, if you think about in history, it took longer and longer the further you go back in history to get those ideas or cultural traits diffused. Um, Today it's much different because of our mass media. We have these things such as the internet, television, other forms of communication and technology that allow things to go what we call viral, and it passes from person to person very quickly. Some concept as how a virus in healthcare would spread quickly, person to person. So does this type of diffusion of popular culture. Maybe you see somebody or somebody around you, wearing a particular clothing style, and all of a sudden this clothing style catches on, and you see more and more people wearing this clothing style. That would be an example of how popular culture can go viral. Other examples that you see here, memes, like you saw in this picture here, go viral. You've probably seen this one before. There are many others out there, and these are constantly made and constantly diffused throughout popular society. And in many different ways, these are made by people in that particular cultural group of popular cultures, the widespread culture, and it's constantly changing. You see new things of popular culture pop up every day, it seems like. Some of the things that you view on social media or the TV is something that somebody somewhere has created, and because of globalization and technology, it is diffused very quickly. And so that's kind of the relationship that we see with popular culture. And notice it's very different than folk culture, which is tradition based and often hasn't changed much in hundreds, if not thousands of years. All right, so those two types of culture are the main ones that we see make up our entire culture. So you can see some more examples here, and I want you to be thinking about how these two types of cultures might affect your own personal culture.